Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. This presentation is actually from the newly established New Jersey Association of Senior Centers, which New Jersey Advocates for Aging Well is helping to establish. We think it's really important that the growing number of senior centers in New Jersey have an opportunity to share resources, network, share training. Um, and move forward together to better serve our aging population. And one of the things that we identified from a survey we did of senior centers was that many of them have members who are experiencing hearing loss, but they weren't always prepared to help them, either with resources or to help make their senior center or community space more hearing friendly. So I'm very happy today that we have two speakers. The first is Elizabeth Hill. She is the director of the Division of Deaf and Hard of Hearing at the New Jersey Department of Human Services. Elizabeth also spoke at our conference two conferences ago, the great presentation. And I also want to welcome Colette Reasonover, a PhD student at Rutgers School of Social Work. She's about to start that program, who was also our intern last year. And Colette did a wonderful job serving senior centers and helping us get the association off the ground. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth first. And then, as I said, we will stop. We can do questions, and then Colette will do her presentation. We can have more questions and discussion afterwards. And Elizabeth, I think you're off mute. Go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Hope you can hear me. I believe I'm off mute. Thank you for the introduction, Kathy. I appreciate it. I'm Elizabeth Hill. I've been director here at the Division of Deaf and Hard of Hearing for a little over 7 years now. We have a number of programs and services that are and could be useful for the members that you serve. So I will touch a little bit about our programs and services at the end of this presentation, but if you ever want more information, please feel free to contact our office. I'll have the contact information at the end of the last slide. And we welcome all questions. So the Division of Deaf and Hard of Hearing is within the Department of Human Services. Our mission is to do exactly what I'm doing today, is to provide education, advocacy. We also have direct services. Our goal is to increase accessibility to programs, services, and information that is available to everybody else. So part of how to make what we're going to talk about today is how to make senior centers a little bit more deaf and hard of hearing friendly. And so some of the areas that I'll be talking about is our general environment, thinking about safety and emergency access, communication practices when speaking with somebody, some ideas for inclusive programs and activities, and thinking about accommodations and communication access. These are just some.
And yeah, if the state chooses, they can choose to implement none of them or all of them.
I'm sorry? Kathy, I think you're on mute.
Okay, that was, if you haven't done so already, please mute yourself because we were picking up background noises. Sorry, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Okay, I thought maybe it was a question for me, but thank you. So then we'll also talk about accommodations and communication access. So these are some of the topic areas that we'll just briefly touch on today. And if anybody has any questions, wants something to go more in depth, we are here for that. So I am thrilled that we are talking about this today because hearing loss is actually very common among older adults. There was actually some statistics that I came across that said once you're past the age of 65, you're more than half likely to have a hearing loss. Once you get to 75, the percentage increases. So it is fairly common, but the issue that surrounds it is the stigma that people feel around having hearing loss, especially if they've led most of their lives having normal hearing and then acquiring it later in life. There's a fair amount of stigma and a sense of having to pass as not having a hearing loss. So there are approximately 48 million Americans who are deaf or hard of hearing, and particularly in cases where adults have not had a hearing loss for most of their life, once the hearing starts to decline, there is more of a risk of social isolation, missing critical announcements, having some issues with safety, mostly because of the not addressing the hearing loss. So for people who acquire hearing loss later in life, there's a lot of shame and stigma surrounding getting hearing aids, if that's appropriate for them, or getting a cochlear implant, depending on the level and severity of the loss. But just the social isolation typically comes about because they're just not able to hear conversation. They're just not able to participate in communication. So then it might look like reducing time with family, reducing time with friends, feeling like they can't participate in group activities because more often than not, speech comes across as sort of garbled and it's just not clear. And there are cases where even if you are using a hearing aid, sometimes it's still not clear. Sometimes hearing aids themselves will just amplify the volume and not necessarily make speech more comprehensible when speaking to people. So it's really, I think our goal here is to make hearing loss more normalized, just in the sense that, like, most of us have glasses. I have reading glasses. I'm at that age where I have to go to see an eye doctor every year. People talk about it. Nobody thinks a second thing about that. We need to get to a place where the same is true for acquiring hearing loss later in life, that this is just a part of aging and loss. It's just part of getting older that we're going to have that. So normalizing it and reducing the stigma around it can help while we're talking about this topic. So what does it look like in adults? It varies, really. The hearing, deaf and hard of hearing community is not a monolith. It's definitely not one size fits all. Communication needs are really specific to the individual. It just depends on the background. Some people are deaf and identify with being culturally deaf and maybe use sign language as a primary language, may need sign language interpreters. You might come across that in a senior center. But then there are others who, like I mentioned, maybe had normal hearing their entire lives, acquired a hearing loss later in life, and they just may need more assistance with amplification devices, hearing aids, benefit more from having clear speech, which we'll talk about that, quiet settings, and using other assistive technology devices. There's also a category called deaf and blind, and there are some subsets within that. There are individuals who are culturally deafblind, use sign language, tactile signing, because they have both vision loss and hearing loss. But the category of deaf blindness can also include older adults who just happen to have both, as acquiring it through age, having vision loss, having hearing loss, and they might need more special accommodations. So just to emphasize, everything within the deaf and hard of hearing community is very specific to the individual. Some people use spoken language, some use sign language, some use hearing aids, some use cochlear implants, some rely on closed captioning, and some use a combination of all the above. So for example, for me, I am deaf. I use sign language, but I also use spoken language. I have cochlear implants, but I also rely on closed captioning. And there are some situations where I benefit from sign language interpreters. So every situation is different and every person is different. If you're really curious to learn more about some tips and tricks for communication access, what are good practices, the Division of Deaf and Hard of Hearing has what we call a guide to communication access available on a website in both English and Spanish. So again, it may change depending on the activity, the setting, language they use, the technology, and then fatigue. And it really is just about asking members, what do they need? What do they prefer? And asking in a way that normalizes that conversation, like we provide that here, in a way that's not lends itself to the stigma that a lot of members may feel. Fatigue is very real. Listening fatigue is very real. Trying to hear you're using a lot of extra brain power And that really does drain a person. Even a person who may have hearing aids, cochlear implants, seems like they're hearing, it still takes a lot out of the person. So any measures that we can do to make it more inclusive and friendly reduces that cognitive load. It's a real cognitive load. It's just the same as if you had glasses that maybe weren't up to par, like they're maybe an old prescription, for example, and your eyes are straining to read. It's the same thing, and your eyes are going to get tired. It's the same with hearing. The more you're trying to hear, the more cognitive load it puts on you because your brain is trying to piece together information, it's trying to pull things together to make sense of what's coming in. So that's the fatigue, listening fatigue is a real thing. So how can we make some of our environments more accessible? What are some kinds of assistive technology that we can look into? One of the biggest things I think about when I think about community centers or centers of any kind is I think about fire alarms. Most fire alarms that you see are based on audible signals. It's really a good idea to get fire alarms that have a strobe light in addition to the audible signal. And the strobe light is very visual. You can't miss it really. I mean, it's blue, it's big, it's like a bluish white strobe. So those safety measures are important. Doorbells, I don't know if that's applicable here, but if it is, depending on the center, there are doorbells that have flashing. And announcement systems that have text that come out could also be helpful because loud announcement systems are not always comprehensible. I think about sometimes when I'm in certain centers, and and I'll talk about it, if they don't have like some fabrics or whatever, and the sound is echoing, or if it's bouncing off of the walls, those announcement speakers with the audible, it can be very hard to hear. It's very hard to comprehend. Other things to consider are hearing loops or FM systems. So I have a diagram here that shows a hearing loop. It could be worthwhile for senior centers to consider installing hearing loops in main rooms or main activity areas. They are a great technology. What they do is if you have them installed around the perimeter of an activity room, for example, is if a person has a hearing aid or a cochlear implant and they have their T-coil activated within their device, that hearing loop will allow a person to turn on the T-coil and they can hear the speaker directly. And it takes out all of that background noise, all of that echoing that happens in certain buildings. The hearing loops just stream the speaker's voice directly into their device. It's pretty good. And the nice thing about it is you don't need any additional equipment. Like the person doesn't have to go and put on something and have this big bulky equipment on them. They don't, and a lot of older adults don't like that. I know I don't like it. I like just having the privacy of the cochlear implant, my hair covering it up, and I don't have to have anything else. So the loops are nice for that. But in absence of loops, FM systems play a similar role, although there is a need for additional equipment on the individual. But they play a similar thing in allowing for the speaker's voice to directly come to the individual. So those are great for meeting rooms, activity rooms, main halls. Another thing to consider is having telecommunications equipment. If people need access to telecommunications, if they're the center where people make public phone calls, in that situation, there are telecommunications that have the ability to turn the volume up. It's called amplified telephones, or have captions on the phone itself. So if a person's on the call, sometimes they hear a little bit, but other things they're missing, they can read the captions and connect with what they're hearing on the phone. If there are televisions, if you're displaying videos or having any kind of programming happening or on a computer screen, consider adding captions as well. Those are always very helpful. And just having them on automatically so that it's for everybody, not just specific individuals. Having them available for everybody is helpful and goes a long way. Another thing to consider are acoustics. So like I mentioned, some buildings, the sound is just going to build on it, and it's just going to keep amplifying and echoing, and it just becomes a loud din. Very hard to hear in those scenarios. So some things to think about are maybe adding acoustic panels to the walls, maybe carpeting or rugs, curtains, anything to absorb the sound, make it softer, and reduce that echo that's happening off of the hard walls and the floors. Anything that you can do to reduce background noise, like if you're having programming or activity, you don't want like loud music blaring, or you don't want like a TV program happening in another room that can interfere with the activity there. Any kind of way that you reduce background noise, even loud fans sometimes. Sometimes we have these big fans to keep things cool, and they're creating extra noise. Background noise can definitely interfere with the ability to hear. And even just considering lighting, having glare-free lighting, because having access to the visual cues on a person's face to be able to see people, even if they're not actively lip reading, seeing how the lips move and seeing a person's facial expressions really assist with clear communication. And then some other things to think about are some signage, thinking about putting up signs that are bold, high contrast, things that are easy to spot, using symbols to show where restrooms are, exits, services, having visual diagrams. The more signage that is available, the less we have to rely on our hearing for directions, for where to go, for what to do. More signage is very helpful, particularly if it's easy to read. So that just gave some examples from good high contrasting colors, poor low contrasting colors. Just thinking about like, the more we can put visually, the more that we're not having to put more on our cognitive load and trying to hear directions or where to go or what to do. And then just thinking about how we can communicate one-to-one. Maintaining eye contact is very helpful when you're speaking to an individual, speaking clearly at a moderate pace. Sometimes if you notice that somebody's not hearing you, maybe instead of repeating exactly what you just said, sometimes using just a little bit of different words can help a person capture what you mean. The more that we can have things in writing, announcements, printed directions or printed schedules, large printed out things, those can absolutely help reduce that load of trying to hear things. And then, you can plan in advance. We know we're having activities, we know we're going to have these events, planning for sign language interpreters if that's needed, planning for captioning if that's applicable, if that's what's going to be shown, to make the meetings or the classes or the events more inclusive and accessible. Things that we, on an individual, as an individual, that we can do when we're in senior centers is just becoming familiar and comfortable with technology. Because technology is always changing. It's constantly evolving. And just being creative and thinking about how we can be more comfortable with it. And so, for example, if we're talking with an individual and maybe they can't hear because based on a lot of people talking in the background, even just using simple things like speech-to-text apps, even just like talking into your phone and having the text come out and showing the text is a great thing. It can alleviate some of those communication barriers that can sometimes happen. Those apps can be on their phones, can be used on tablets. So one of the apps that I've come across for Android phones in particular is Google's Live Transcribe app. It's amazing. It comes in many different languages. You can put the caption on any language you can think of. You can adjust it so it's big, it's high contrast, it's easy to read. I know Apple uses Otter AI, but there are a lot of number of other apps that can be used. Even just using the Notes app in Apple can work as well. You can speak into the Notes app and enlarge the font and whatnot. Those kind of things that are low cost, easy to do on the spot. It's just things like that, just becoming familiar with technology and being creative in how we can communicate. So other things we can think about is promoting accessibility in general. If we're having events, if we're going to have meetings, we can share flyers in large print. We can include information on how to request accommodations, availability of sign language interpreters, availability of captioning, depending on what you're planning to include in these events, but just promoting it in a way that people know that this is available. Because sometimes people might think, oh, I can't go to this event. I'm not going to be able to hear. I don't think I'll be able to participate. But if we have that information on our flyers or on our advertisements, our promotional materials, people might feel more comfortable. Go, okay, maybe I can do this. I can request this. They're going to provide it, and I can be part of this. So just being conscientious about disability inclusive language and just having maybe a coordinator's name and contact, a person that you designate that they can reach out to request this accommodation, and having it done with enough advance notice, because sometimes it can be very difficult to set up captioning or sign language interpretation at the last minute. It can be hard. So if we make enough advance notice, ideally 2 weeks or more likely than not, we can make including those things can be fairly easy. So then also just connecting members to support. So here at the Division of Deaf and Hard of Hearing, we have 2 hearing aid programs, and that's actually really good. We actually have the better hearing aid programs in most of the country. So one of the hearing aid programs that we have are the hearing aid assistance for the aged and disabled. That program offers reimbursement towards the cost of a hearing aid. So if a person purchased a hearing aid for 1 ear, they potentially could get up to $500 reimbursement towards that hearing aid. If they got 2 hearing aids, they could potentially get up to $1,000 reimbursement. It's a great program. And that's actually in partnership with the Division of Aging Services. The other program that we have is the New Jersey Hearing Aid Project, and that's in our partnership with Montclair State University. That program provides free refurbished hearing aids, free, for those who meet eligibility guidelines. That's really great. So we have 2 hearing aid programs. So if you find that members are in need of amplification, please direct them to this office and we can connect you. Another program that we find that is very helpful for older adults is our equipment distribution program. And that offers free assistive technology for individuals who meet program guidelines. So those are very good programs and can be resources to your members. And our applications are available online, so feel free to help them with their applications or connect them to our office if they need further assistance. So as I mentioned, the equipment distribution program, some of the guidelines around it, you have to have a hearing loss, be a New Jersey resident, and meet the income guidelines, which change on a yearly basis. And then if you're eligible, you receive the technology at no cost. It includes amplification. It includes telecommunications like amplified telephones, caption telephones. We can connect with the resource for that, and visual safety technology. So I'm just going to go briefly over some technological devices that might be useful for older adults in senior centers. One of these is the ADA Maxi Pro personal amplifier, and that can help with amplifying conversations that are happening or small groups. It raises the conversational tone, amplifies. Another one is the Pro TV listening system, where they can connect with a TV to better hear the programming through the Bluetooth. And then this one is the Pocket Talker personal amplifier. That has been pretty popular within the hard of hearing community, and that also acts as an amplification device for speech, being able to hear in conversations while reducing background noise. So those work with headphones or hearing aids. And with basically, you'll see a microphone, you give the microphone to the other person, and then they have the headset and they use to hear it. And the other is the hearing loops, as I mentioned. So earlier in the presentation, I mentioned installing hearing loops within a main room. That might not always be possible. The other thing are portable loops. So there are portable loops, one with a neck loop. Those are lightweight, easy to use. They're equipped with a T-coil. That's also good if a person doesn't have their own device with a T-coil. Not everybody has a T-coil in their devices. Most people do. They just need to have it activated by the audiologist, but there may be an off chance they don't. So that's really good for that. And the other one is the loop pad. And those are good for like when you're going up to a counter and you're providing services and you want a loop mat for that counter area. Those are good for those kind of things. They can also be good for streaming and from televisions, music systems. It allows you to hear better as well. As far as telecommunications, our program offers the Clarity D714. That's an amplified telephone. It raises sound through the phone up to 40 decibels. Also hearing aid compatible. There's also TTYs available through our program. Not a lot of people request TTYs. It's generally if an individual doesn't have access to high-speed internet. And then there are video phones for people to make phone calls in sign language. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because if senior centers have telephones available for public use, then you might want to consider telephones that have amplification capability or captioning capability. And even some centers, if they have a sizable amount of sign language users, you can install public video phones as well, if that's the thing, if that's applicable. But TTYs in general have been fading out of usage. I personally don't own a TTY and haven't since I've been in college a long time ago, for those who are curious. But they are still around in case you don't have access to high-speed internet, and that still provides access to telecommunications. So it's still providing a use. So that's a picture of what a visual fire alarm would look like. It has there, and that's not the only picture. There are different variations of fire alarms with strobe lights. So that's just one example of what it would. It's just very, very bright, and you really can't miss it. There are also carbon monoxide detectors with visual alerts as well. So just getting started for thinking about next steps, just asking the individual what their communication method is, being in the habit of having captions available. Zoom, for example, is great with automatic captions. We use Zoom automated captions for our Zoom advisory and council meetings. It's very accurate. That didn't used to be the case, but now the automated captions are really becoming very accurate and fast. You can also make it known that people can use the relay service if they need to connect with a sign language interpreter to access telecommunications. Include disability inclusive language to your promotional materials, and keep program applications for like hearing aid programs, assistive technology programs as well on stock. And then contact our office. One of the nice things about contacting our office is we have a number of program services available. If you want more in-depth deaf and hard of hearing sensitivity training, it is free at no cost. It's provided 2 times a month through Zoom. Any entity can come on to the training. It's about an hour and a half training. It just provides a lot more in-depth information. We also provide assistive technology demonstrations on Zoom as well. And then we're here for technical assistance. For anybody who has a question, any entity, organization that would like more information, our team is here to help. We answer all questions. And so thank you for having me today. This is our contact information, a phone. We also have a video phone for sign language users, office hours, and our email information and a website. So I'm here for any questions, if anybody has anything.
Hey, thank you, Elizabeth. So let's open it up. Do people have questions or comments? I will be sending out in the follow-up with the recording the links that Elizabeth has shared and some other information. And I see Arlene Romoff. Good to see you. Go ahead, Arlene.
Hi, yes, so it's great to be here. And I have been active. I'm a person with hearing loss. I'm deaf. I've been a cochlear implant user for the past 29 years and very active in the Hearing Loss Association in New Jersey. What you just heard from Liz is the best information you'll ever get in this country. New Jersey is the best. They are addressing things that are needed with current technology and current needs. In other words, you have a lot of people who are oral, aging, and a lot of other places just throw antique accommodations at them. New Jersey is with it. So whatever Liz said, do it. And because our Hearing Loss Association hears from people with hearing loss. And believe me, they need the information that Liz was saying. I've been in touch with some senior residences that are on the ball and providing up-to-date technology and information and networking. So the greatest place to begin is what you just heard. So I want you to know that because not every presentation on Zoom is something that you want to put away and say, this is for me. This is going to make a big difference in my work. And that's what you just heard here.
Thank you, Arlene. And I do have a recording of a presentation you did for us once. I will include that when I send out the other materials. We did it a few years ago.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Arlene.
You're welcome. It's just we've been working together, and I've been involved for 30 years with the Division of Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and following all the technology, and we've got it right here in New Jersey. So it's not a given. Believe me, it's not a given, and we're very fortunate.
Does anybody else have questions or comments for Elizabeth? One of the things I wanted to touch on is you talked about stigma. And it's interesting, you said like if about almost half the population has some form of hearing loss as they age, and yet the stigma still exists.
Yeah.
It's interesting. In my book club, two people have hearing aids because I think they got hearing aids in their 50s when they first started to notice a sign, and they didn't want to be left out of anything. So is it shifting? Is the stigma getting less? Is it because people have outdated views of what a hearing aid looks like or is? Where do you think this is still coming from?
I think, and I appreciate your question, and I do hope that the things are shifting. I think it really just depends on the individual as well. How, like some people just, okay, I'm going to go and get a hearing aid, and other people are like, getting a hearing aid, that means I'm old. I mean, I've heard literally people say that. I've heard word for word people say, if I get a hearing aid, that means I'm old. Like, what? Like, just because I have glasses doesn't mean I'm, old. I'm proud. I need glasses. It's just a fact, right? But I think having those conversations around, like, hey, my friend just got a hearing aid, I think those things help normalize the conversations. But I also think another thing that's happened in recent years is the presence of over-the-counter hearing aids has changed things. Absolutely. It used to be that you didn't see hearing aids anywhere in drugstores or pharmacies. It wasn't a thing. And if you just had a mild hearing loss, probably what your friends in your book club may have, if they just need to go and stick something in their ear, the presence of over-the-counter hearing aids and the advertising that we're now seeing around OTCs, over-the-counter hearing aids, I think is a real shift, particularly for those who just need that little assistance. I also think we see people around who have things in their ears all the time now. And it's like the phone, the little thing over there, or whatnot, or the earbuds, or those things. They didn't have that when I was growing up. Like, you didn't have anything in your ears when I was growing up. Like, that wasn't a popular culture. But now, because we're seeing more and more things in people's ears, I think it's helping to change the conversation. I think we still have a long way to go, though. It's one thing to have a mild hearing loss. It's quite another if your hearing loss is a little bit more on the moderate to severe side, which can happen with older adults acquiring it. And in that situation, I think there's still a significant amount of stigma around that, because with mild hearing loss and having those little things in your ears, you can still pretty much get a lot of the conversation around you. But once your hearing loss becomes more moderate to severe to profound, it really is a lot more difficult, and it's really harder to pass as hearing. It's just a lot harder. And the cognitive load is real. I mean, for me too. I am talking with you today. I'm having a presentation with you today. But I find that if I'm in a meeting that's past the 1 hour mark, for example, even if I have captions and I'm reading them and I'm trying to process it, really, I'm tired afterwards. It's hard. So that's really true for somebody who doesn't have amplification and is just trying to get by with that. So yeah, thank you for your question.
Let's see, Janet Sharma, go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, I have it's really an observation, and it's based on personal experience. And I think there's self-stigmatization. My husband refused to admit that he had hearing loss for a long time. He finally got hearing aids, refused to wear them, refused to get used to them, and drove us all crazy because we knew that he just couldn't hear what we were doing. And finally, he's getting better, but he still says, "Oh, I just took a shower. I can't put my hearing aids in." That's baloney. He can dry off his ears with a Kleenex. But it's just what he does to himself just drives the rest of us crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, that is a real
And that's
thing.
not alone. I hear that from a lot of my friends, either male or female. The spouse is driving them crazy because they refuse to admit that they have hearing loss or use the hearing aids.
That's absolutely a real thing. And I went through that with my grandfather, who really needed hearing aids later in life. The unfortunate thing, and just in his defense, just for a little bit, for a minute there, in his defense, hearing aids are really not the same as glasses. Like, I put on glasses, now I can see the text better. Putting on a hearing aid doesn't always make the speech sound better. It just makes it louder. I used to be a person with hearing aids when I was younger, and I tried to pass, trying to think I was hearing. I really wasn't. I hear better now with cochlear implants than I ever did with hearing aids, which is amazing when you think about it. But it's unfortunately the technology is just not quite there where hearing aids make speech comprehensible. Maybe that's what he's feeling. I'm not saying that it is, but no, what you're sharing is, I hear that a lot, especially for people who are more in the moderate to profound range, not so much the mild range.
Yeah.
Thank you for your comments.
Go ahead, Melissa.
Hi.
And then we'll get to Colette.
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to piggy, Elizabeth, you've provided amazing information to the group, and I'm so glad that you've had the opportunity to share this. And that what you've just said about the stigma around hearing aids, I think really speaks to the greater ageism. And I'm glad you mentioned how internalized that is, because I think that is very much like individuals who are experiencing hearing loss or hearing difficulty later in life. It is a signal to them that they're getting older, and just the perception of the people around them. They don't want to seem like their age is a detriment to them, or that it's, or that they're getting older. Like, we hear people say that. So I think it is a clear indication of the greater ageism in our society, and people's wanting to avoid appearing old, which is something that we are definitely wanting to address. But I also did wonder how much of it was an economic piece as well and the affordability. So I'm glad that you mentioned the hearing aid programs and the connection to our NJAAW application. We certainly, when we go out to do presentations about the application, mention that it's included in that, and that your agency is available for additional resources. Because I think that is another factor for some individuals in getting help, because they've heard that they're expensive. And so not only the benefit, but also the over-the-counter product makes it more accessible for more people. So thank you for sharing all that with everybody.
No, definitely. Thank you, Melissa. Definitely hearing aids are, particularly for those who can't just get by with those little hearing aids that you put in the ears, they're very expensive. They can range 5,000 to 7,000 per hearing aid. And that's out of the reach of most people. And it's not covered by Medicare. So that's why it's so critical that we have these programs to be able to provide access for individuals who need these devices. So we appreciate your partnership with you, Melissa. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Colette, if you want to share your screen. If you weren't on in the very beginning, we were very pleased to have Colette Reasonover with us last year as an MSW intern, and she is moving on as a PhD student at Rutgers. Colette is, for those of you at senior centers, she was the one doing the survey, did a presentation on our findings at our conference. And one of the things that we heard over and over from the senior centers was, just there's the need, but they didn't have the resources or know what to do to help people who were experiencing hearing loss. So, Colette, I'm turning it over to you for your suggestions.
Yes, so I, hearing about this topic, wanted to try and provide some really concrete, low-cost environmental adjustments that senior centers, community centers, or even private individuals within their own home could do to help alleviate some of the difficulties that may arise for individuals that are hard of hearing or individuals that use assistive devices. None of these recommendations are meant to replace the assistive devices, merely to help lessen the environmental impact of some things like background noises, and other factors that may make it more difficult to communicate within community environments. So a little bit of background about me. I have just finished my master's in social work. I'm going into a PhD program at Rutgers focused in aging, disability, and caregiving. But I additionally also have a master's in English and Disability Studies. So a lot of these recommendations I've kind of gathered over time working with advocates in the deaf and hard of hearing communities. And also when I was a teacher and I implemented some of these things inside of my classroom to help my students that were hard of hearing or had auditory processing differences. So let's see. As a general rule of thumb, there are 4 factors that you kind of want to keep in mind. We really want to utilize the surfaces that we already have. Mixing hard and soft surfaces can help balance noise across a room. Hard surfaces are generally going to reflect noise more than soft surfaces, which will absorb them. We also want to consider the shape of the room. Most rooms are going to be rectangular. Unfortunately, that can cause some interesting auditory bouncing that we may want to balance by utilizing those soft surfaces, especially in corners. We also want to strategically dampen noise. For instance, hard floors, we might want to find a way to limit the noise of like heel strikes on a floor. And then we also want to isolate the room from external sources of noise. Those are usually going to come from windows and doors. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about this as we go on. So, hard surfaces. As a general rule of thumb, they have a lot of positives and a couple of drawbacks. Generally, they're hard to clean. They're easy to navigate for people that use mobility assistive devices like wheelchairs, walkers, rollators, and canes. And they limit tripping hazards, which is especially big for our senior centers. We definitely don't want people falling. So while a lot of, if you look up online how to limit noise, a lot of the recommendations are going to be to add a rug or area rugs. That may not work in the context of a senior center for all centers because of that increased fall risk and the potential difficulty that it might add for people using mobility assistive devices. And it's also probably what you're already working with. So if I'm trying to keep the cost low, I want to add as little as possible. And you'll notice as I go on, I'll have a cost counter at the bottom right corner of each slide, so that you can keep track of how much each one of these adjustments might cost you. So the big cons of hard surfaces are going to be that it reflects noise very well. Typically, the harder the surface, the more it's going to reflect noise. That can cause a lot of issues when you're trying to overhear someone. Even just sitting across from you, if you've got a noise coming from over here that's bouncing off of the walls. And it also contributes to a lot of visual glare. This can be especially important in the context of seniors because we often see that seniors might not only have hearing loss that they either have from birth or progressively over time, but they also tend to have vision changes. These vision changes can make glare actually more intense. So if we can try and mattify surfaces and not have bright, shiny objects either behind speakers or light sources directly behind speakers, that can make it easier for people to visually see one another and read those nonverbal and verbal cues. All right, so let's work with what you've already got. This slide should cost you nothing. So one of the big things that you want to do is think about seating and the seating arrangements. Ideally, if you can, circular tables with a maximum diameter around 4 feet is going to be what's recommended. If that's not possible, if you have group chairs that are like on a rectangular long table, that might help because when you cluster people together, they might naturally form groups where they're easier to communicate and can visually see each other. We also want to make sure to move our seating areas away from constant internal or external sources of noise. For those of us that may not have hearing difficulties or may not need an assistive device, we might not notice that the air conditioner creates a constant hum because we might be able to filter it more easily. If you're having a hard time hearing the person talking just across from you, that extra noise creates an increased cognitive load, like Elizabeth Hill was talking about in her presentation earlier. So if we can strategically try and place our tables away from those sources of noise, then we can lessen them even just slightly. We also want to try and improve those verbal and nonverbal cues by keeping anything on the table below eye level. That way, if you're sitting across from someone that you're talking to, you're able to see their full face and then also see any gestures that they might be making. That can just help improve communication. And then also optimize both the lighting and the background. If we have, a bright, fun poster right behind someone, that might be visually distracting and might make it a little bit harder. But equally at the same time, if the background is about the same tone as their skin tone, that might make it harder for people to visually distinguish, especially with progressive vision loss that we sometimes see in senior populations. So if you're able to have either art on the wall or the paint on the wall be away from skin tone, but a relatively neutral dark color, that may help improve visual cues. But if that's not possible, gotta work with what you got. So talking about the shape of the room, most of the rooms that we're going to be working with are generally rectangular, which means we have a lot of parallel walls. If we can arrange furniture to break up those walls so the sound doesn't go ping-ponging back and forth between all the two walls and then also all 4 walls, that can help break up the parallel elements. So for example, even just putting a bookshelf against a wall can help divert sound and trap it in that little corner where the bookshelf meets the wall. This can make a marginal difference that accumulates as we do more of it. Corners tend to concentrate low frequency noise. So for instance, if you've got a TV show in the background that's got a bass and you have people sitting in the corner, they're going to catch more of that low frequency noise and have a harder time speaking to each other. So if we can concentrate absorptive soft materials in those corners, then we can try and capture some of that sound and stop it from reflecting around the room. So, for example, if you see the picture I have on the right, we do have some sharp corners in the seating, but we also have this cloth ottoman that should help catch some of that noise and assist with absorbing some of that background noise. So we want to avoid placing seating areas in corners if at all possible. We also, and this gets tricky with navigating space physically, especially when we might be dealing with mobility assistive devices, avoid regular arrangement of furniture. So that would be two rows of tables in parallel lines. That's going to basically create little sound tunnels or hallways where the sound can travel. While that can significantly improve the ability to move between spaces, especially when you need added space to fit things like a wheelchair, rollator, or other mobility assistive device, we might want to think about potentially rearranging the rooms slightly to offset the tables enough that we maybe, instead of having two long rows, have two shorter rows that are offset against each other. That way we just don't have that same long hallway. And just rearranging the furniture will cost you time, but hopefully no money. And this is unfortunately where it stops being free. So these are things that you can add to your space to help absorb that sound. Like Elizabeth Hill mentioned in her presentation earlier, the addition of heavy curtains and throw pillows can help absorb some of that noise. But in addition to that, I would also encourage pads on the bottom of chairs and table legs. They have some that have enough friction that someone will have the chair slide out from under them, but that when you move the chair, you won't have that squeaking noise happen. And when you have a lot of people moving around a room, moving chairs around, moving tables, that can add up and can cause quite a lot of auditory fatigue. You also might want to engage in strategic placement of acoustic foam. You'll see up this top picture on the right here. These are kind of our more artistic acoustic foam that you can put on the wall. But you can additionally, to absorb sound from the floor, put acoustic foam on the underside of tables and chairs. When I was teaching, got a big roll of it, cut it up, and put it on the underside of all of the desks and chairs in my room to help with the sound of heel strikes and also just the noise bouncing off of the floor. I was shocked at how efficacious it was. I do recommend that if you are going to do that, try and cut the foam, especially for tables, about 3 to 4 inches smaller than the size of the table. That way, if someone spills something and it runs underneath the ledge, it doesn't hit the foam. Additionally, one of the things you can do is add partitions. So you'll see down here, they're maybe not always the most pretty thing, but you can, any kind of extra barrier you can have to disperse noise may help. So these cloth partitions you can find for many office buildings, and can be used not only to help absorb the noise, but also to separate areas. So if you're in a senior center or community center where you have multiple events running concurrently and they all have to be in the same room, this can help not only visually mark off the space so that people have a clear indication of where to go for which event, but have the added benefit of absorbing sound. All right, so I mentioned earlier, we want to isolate our space. That means we ideally want to keep outside or background noise from significantly impacting the hearing of any individual within the room. This background noise, especially street noise, heel strikes from a hallway, or air conditioning noise, fans, like Ms. Hill mentioned earlier, can be especially impactful for people using assistive devices for hearing. So one of the things that you want to do is look to your windows. I know some people may not consider their windows often, but they have these little things called gaskets that help not only stop air from leaving or entering the building, but also may help block noise. These do need to be cleaned and changed on a semi-regular basis, but they're also not something people think about often. So if you're in a senior center, this can be a low-cost adjustment, is just taking out and replacing your gaskets. I've done it myself multiple times in different apartments. I'm not the most handy person in the world, so I believe and trust that you can do it too, if you so choose. And if we have to be selective cost-wise, these are relatively low cost. A roll should cover you, and that's a Lowe's trip. This entire page costs about $55. But if we do need to be selective, either with time or money, try and focus on windows and doors that are facing streets or hallways. This will help absorb some of the noise without having to replace windows and doors. Foot traffics from hallways and also any kind of noise coming from other rooms and hallways can be especially impactful. Because hallways are walking paths, they're not going to have a lot of the absorptive properties that we have, and they're just basically long parallel lines. So sound is going to bounce off of hallways very frequently and very loudly. It carries quite well. So wear comfy shoes. If you've ever worn heels and walked through an empty hallway, you are well aware of how loud those can be. So wearing comfy shoes where you don't have hard soles can help just eliminate that factor altogether. And we want to close the door whenever possible. Much like windows, doors also have gaskets that can be replaced. And you can add foam to those doors. I also recommend the use of acoustic blankets. However, as you might see on the right, they can look a little bit like padded walls and may be kind of discomforting for some people to see them. So if you have a utility or closet in a room, or a door that just simply isn't opened or is mostly used by staff, you can put the acoustic blanket on the back side of the door. It won't be as impactful as absorbing sound as it would if it were on the front side of the door. However, it does help. All right, so as I mentioned, these are all of the items that I mentioned throughout this presentation. If you bought one of everything, the total comes out to $164. So this can be done at relatively low cost. By the way, all of these are links to different Amazon products I found. My rule for finding these was I had to be able to find it in under 5 minutes, and it had to be the cheapest functional thing that I could find. If you are an online shopping wizard, you may be able to find better products for a better price. But I just wanted to give you an idea that this can be done at a relatively low cost with working with what you've already got going on. This does not necessarily have to be a massive lift. The space can be made more accessible without making compromises for accessibility and other factors. And all of this is meant to be in addition to whatever other resources you are able to mobilize for folks that are deaf or hard of hearing. So I have some resources I just wanted to shout out and add. The Deaf Space Design Guidelines is about 150 guidelines for making community spaces, especially schools, but also other factors of life, more accessible for folks that may be deaf or hard of hearing. There are also 3 articles I've linked here that are all architectural design, and these are like very accessible, relatively short articles with more tips about how to make spaces a little bit more accessible and more design more for people that may have hearing difficulties. All right, so if anyone would like to contact me or the Hub for Aging collaboration, that's the folks that I will be working with at Rutgers. I have our contact info here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present and for listening to my presentation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I am going to send out the slides with those live links on it so you can all find it more easily. My question, Colette, was going to be like, where do you find acoustic foam? But you can find it online.
Yes, you can also get a massive, what I did was I got a massive roll of it, which is more than any one person could ever possibly need, in my opinion, from Lowe's
Okay.
years ago. And then I used it as packing foam when I had to move.
Okay. So, does anybody have any other questions, comments? You can unmute yourselves and we can open it up. Before we even get the questions, I want to thank both Elizabeth and Colette for this very informational, very informative, and like Arlene had said, we do have so much in New Jersey and we need to get the word out. We actually had a program last year called Connecting Providers to Resources for Older Patients because we were talking with a geriatric group and the doctor says, I get so frustrated because so many patients come in and they think they have signs of dementia, but really they have hearing loss and they can't afford the hearing aids. And we said, well, New Jersey has two programs to help with hearing aids, and the doctor was not aware of it. So we have shared the information from NJAAW and Elizabeth's group pretty widely with geriatricians and other providers serving older adults. Just hearing that, the resources are there, but people, especially the doctors, weren't aware of it. And we think that little things like that can make a big difference in the quality of aging here. Hey, Arlene, I see you have your hand up first. Go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to comment on one of the accommodations that you showed, which was that acoustic panel that you put behind a conference table.
Yes.
Actually used one of those it was 25 people around a lot of tables in a room that was bigger. And so they put this partition to make it seem like the room is smaller. By chance, I sat right in front of that partition. And that's where I stayed because I could hear better there. And they were just using it as a room divider, but it actually was functioning for me as limiting that sound, and that made it easier for me to hear. So that was really incredible. And the other thing I wanted to mention that cochlear implants are covered by Medicare. Okay, whereas hearing aids are not.
Interesting.
Cochlear implants are all covered by Medicare. That's a medical thing. It has uh, the criteria and it's all very individual, 1 year, 2 years. And so that's a medical thing, but Medicare does cover that. Typically, I don't know every permutation and everything, but in general, Medicare does cover cochlear implants, but not hearing aids.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, they should, but they don't. Okay.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing your experience with the partitions. It's amazing how little adjustments can make a big difference. And especially when done with intention, can accumulate to make things just a little bit easier.
I was really surprised to see that picture. I was like, oh, yeah, I did that.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, with that, we will let you all go. Thank you again, Elizabeth and Colette, for your presentations today and sharing your information expertise. We will send out the recording, links, and some attachments on the things that they discussed to make it easier for you to follow up on. Thank you, and we hope to see you all again soon.